It is my pleasure to introduce to you Leo Gantz from Wealth Research Group. Here we're going to have some discussion about precious metals and geopolitics, because geopolitics plays a huge role in gold and silver, especially this year and last year. Leo Gantz is in Israel, and he has seen a lot over the last couple of months here, and we're going to talk about Russia, Ukraine, tariffs, a lot of different things. Let's get on with the most recent news. Donald Trump has sent 2 nuclear submarines. So it doesn't necessarily mean there's nuclear weapons on those submarines, but there could be. We just don't know. It's a matter of mystery, based off of what Medvedev said in a recent threat against the United States of America. And so Trump is reacting. That happened late afternoon East Coast time here in the US, that precious metals had a chance to react a little bit, but not a whole lot. But as we digest that news over the weekend, what is your take on that? The Russia-Ukraine war and gold and silver. Donald Trump has won the presidency with an idea or a policy, a doctrine that he's already crafted and drafted in the years that the 46th president, whoever that was in office. So we are in an era where the United States is now going back to asserting its supremacy and its hegemony over its way of life. Because what had happened, especially after the early 90s with Clinton, Bush, and then Obama and Biden, and also during Trump's first term, where he basically wasn't allowed to enact on policies. You had a trajectory that was deindustrializing the United States and taking away its constitution. It basically became a different country. What is happening now is it's reasserting its framework and its build as the United States of America that the Founding Fathers had in mind with their Constitution, and that several key thinkers over the past 250 years have perfected. And that Donald Trump believes in their vision of how this country should run in terms of foreign policy and economics, etc. Of course, with the will of the people and the mandate that the voters gave, has given him. What you're seeing in terms of the way that he handles adversaries, especially if it's kinetic, you need to think very differently than presidents that you've seen since the end of World War II. So this is not about boots on the ground. It's not about forever war. It's not about fighting some other country's war. All of these ideas are over. The Trump doctrine is get the job done and be very lethal. And if you can't pull back, reassess, do it all over again with a different strategy. And the military option in general is considered to be the last resort. The first resort is part of the global war. That is unconventional, without any bolts fired. And that is the war against China's Belt and Road Initiative. So the main war that America is now fighting is who gets to control the supply chains and the trade routes of the world. And Russia plays a key role in that, because Russia has a very long border with China that has been a problematic border for them, for the two countries, for hundreds of years. These countries are not naturally aligned. On the other side, Russia borders Europe, so it's in a unique position where it has 8 time zones within the country. So think about Vladimir Putin. For him, if it's 3 o'clock p.m., he has people that he governs. For them, it's 7 o'clock a.m. They live a completely different lifestyle. So it's a huge country, and it has enormous potential. And what the blink Obama-Biden doctrine did was bring them very close to China. The main doctrine that persisted throughout the Cold War was, don't let Russia merge with Germany, because you had skillful industry and energy, and you didn't want them together. That would be a very existential threat to the United States. What Blinken and Obama and Biden did was they did essentially the same thing. They brought Russia, which is energy, to a China, which is industry, and what Trump is trying to do is decouple that. In order to do that, he has been doing many things, but one of them is to try and stop the war, with the idea that stopping it would bring Russia back to the West, back into G7 and into a new vision for its future. That will not be easy, because Russia's main concern always throughout the past 7 or 8 centuries, when Moscow was its center of life, is that it's surrounded but by flat plateau, by plains that are very easy to conquer and advance. The Tataris, the Mongols, Napoleon, Hitler, They all went and almost got to Moscow, because it's very hard to defend the Russian plains and the Russian plateaus from Asia or from Europe. Therefore, Russia always seeks to expand into the mountains, and that essentially is what Vladimir Putin is trying to sell to his people, that this war is justified if we can get to those defendable borders. That has not worked out well at all. From his original plan to conquer the entire country of Ukraine and fold it basically in 3 days by effectively turning the government into surrendering to him. This has gone on for now more than 3 years, and it's going nowhere. It is going nowhere. And just to give you an idea, if you do have 500,000 to 1 million dead soldiers, that is equivalent in the United States to 3 million. It's amazing. It's underreported. The battlefield is underreported, like what's going on, the travesty, it's so plateau. And because of the drone warfare that has been perfected by the Ukrainians, this now becomes a situation where the checkmate is from Trump. And that's why he shortened the ultimatum that he gave Putin, because Putin has not reached a point where he can tell the people of his country this was worth it. These sons and daughters died for ensuring our permanence. These borders have not been reached. So he has within his government many people that want to intensify the war and go even stronger and more violent. And on the other side, he has people that see that the war is not justified for him. Peace now means he risked his own presidency because there might be a coup from within. But on the other side, he cannot continue to wage this. If Trump puts secondary tariffs on on India, China, and Brazil for dealing with Russia, then this month, August, I have said in our newsletter in Wealth Research Group, if I've said August would be the most desperate that Putin will get. And what you're seeing now is part of that. He's trying in any way possible to better his positions before the ceasefire. And that's what you're seeing right now. But he has never met an American president that knows him so well and understands all the little nuances of his personality and is able to counter that with such measures, such as stating that he's moved 2 nuclear submarines into an area that poses a threat to Moscow, which to Putin would be a huge embarrassment, something that would really make him in his weakest position since he took power. And that being said, it's going to cause a lot of uncertainty and maybe another desperate act. I don't know, because, he uses his mouthpiece Med to make that statement. But really, that's Putin saying that making these threats, which is why Trump has acted and sent those nuclear submarines within striking range. And so it's going to be very interesting to see how that plays out, especially as the markets digest this news and what could come of it when the Asian markets open up at 6:00 p.m. Eastern Time, and to see what happens with gold and silver next week as we continue to see what kind of back and forth there's going to be. Who's going to capitulate? Is there going to be capitulation, or is this going to be a stalemate? Russia is continuing to send ordnance into Kiev and continuing to wage war. And so how is this going to what kind of effect is this going to have on the precious metals market? Well, the answer is we just don't know. In classic Slavic warfare between Slavic nations, the Russians, the Ukrainians, the Poles, etc., because this is such flat land, normally a war can last a decade, 2, 3. That's very normal for wars between these countries that live on these huge plateaus. And so, to that effect, this is a very short war. But in our world, where we live in a world with lethal weaponry and with the ability to essentially destroy entire cities within one decision, this has been a very long war between 2 countries where one of them is bordering NATO, and the entire thing is about this question of NATO on the borders of Russia or not. This comes down to whether or not you trust the judgment of Donald Trump, because this is who is with the upper hand. If you trust this judgment, then in 1 month from now, or even sooner, we could be ending a war that is potentially very dangerous. It is very dangerous for 3 main reasons. 1, distancing Russia brings it closer to China. That is very bad for the world, for the West, but for the world in general. It's just one of the riskiest and most dangerous partnerships that you can have. That's 1. 2. We've already seen North Korean soldiers being deployed on the battlefield. In other words, this has now become more than just a Russia-Ukraine war, because Putin has shown the ability to enlist other nations into this war and bring Asian soldiers into the European continent. And thirdly, and we have to acknowledge this is the second largest nuclear country in the world in terms of their arsenal. So between those three things, this is a very dangerous situation. And now when you're on that finishing line, it comes down to whether or not you trust the judgment of Donald Trump. I personally do. Because you saw with Pakistan and India that he does have the ability to bring these sides to the table using his toolkit. And after he already struck a trade deal with the European Union and has already convinced NATO to purchase arms from the United States and has already done a drone deal with Ukraine, he's showing Vladimir Putin that he's thinking outside of the box of the standard NATO clauses for why America would join the war. And he's going around that and doing something much more creative that is actually helping the American taxpayer, helping the defense industries in the United States. It's putting the bulk of the whir on the European continent. In my opinion, this is going to be ending on a positive note, but I do think that there's never been a Russian leader that has come to the table from a position of weakness. He has to show to the Russian people that they can be proud of their achievements. And therefore, in the next few days and weeks, he has to show strength. He has to. Well, Trump also has Thailand and Cambodia also on his list of squashing hostilities there as well. So I agree with you. Well, let's move on to silver. Silver we saw take a little bit of a pullback recently in the last few days, but it has reached a 14-year high. And what do you see for silver given what we've talked about in other factors as well? So, did you see the jobs report that came out? Yes. So the job report was weak. And Trump fired basically the head of the Statistics Bureau because she was fudging with the numbers for months and months, even during the Outpin administration. So Wall Street doesn't work that way. So Wall Street is working based on that report, artificial, fake, contracted or not. And so what happened after the report came out is another rate cut was penciled in for 2025. So right now the markets are already pricing in a September rate cut, and either an October or December rate cut. Regardless, 2 rate cuts already penciled in for 2025. That, to me, has set the bar very high for gold and silver to continue to rally in 2025. So I think the dollar is going to get stronger now that 2 rate cuts are penciled in. It's like the worst outcome, right? It's already part of what's priced into the market. So you're thinking 2 quarter-point cuts, yes. 2 for a half-point total. Okay, yes. And that means that the dollar right now is already at its weakest, because it's already pricing those 2 cuts in. So the pain trade, in other words, the contrarian move, is a stronger dollar. Therefore, I think that gold and silver, after a phenomenal first 7 or 8 months to the year, are going to experience some sort of a correction. And now this is a correction before we head much higher for both. For me, at the beginning of the year, I said that silver this year would reach around 39. That's where it kind of peaked. And I said that gold would reach between 3,400 and 3,500. That's where it peaked as well. So for me, that works with my idea of where precious metals would peak in 2025. How severe is the correction? I don't think it's going to be a big correction. I think it's going to be a mild correction. But nevertheless, I think both metals have peaked for 2025. Okay, wow, that's newsworthy. That's because I'm actually a little bit more bullish on silver for various reasons, but yeah, that makes sense. You mentioned China earlier, and what do you think about Trump's agenda in rebuilding the American economy and the trade negotiations with China? We know we have somewhat of a loose framework there. We know that China really is should be the real ultimate focus here. So, what are your thoughts there with China? I think that Trump, even as far back as 2016, understood that China is his main focus. What is really different between the first presidency and this one is that now he has the mandates of the American people, and he can really, without the interruption of, you call it the deep state, but I just call it career-long politicians, that their agenda is very different than the agenda of the American voter. They're not working for the voter. They're working for the system. So he's been able, with this victory and the mandate that he has, at least now in the first 6 or 7 months of his presidency, I think that it will get harder as we go along. He's been able to really bulldozer his policies and really do what he thinks is the right way to work with China. For Donald Trump, everything is about the other side's weakness and his leverage. The weaknesses of China are the following. 1. It has collapsing demographics. The fertility rate per woman is just over 1. In other words, for every 2 people that die in China, only 1 is born. That country is in a societal collapse. It's going to go below 1 billion people within the next 10 to 15 years, and it's going to go below 800 million people by the end of the century. It is a country that, if it doesn't change course, and it's very hard to see how family household formation changes to go back to above replacement fertility rates, which is 2.1. It's hard to see how the current build of China as one country under the CCP exists even by the end of the century. But right now they are the strongest that they can be, because 1, America has been weakened substantially, and its weakest point came during the COVID lockdowns when Trump really understood how fragile the American supply chain is and how fragile its military is. And then even worse came 4 years of more appeasement, more corruption, and more problems that gave away more to the CCP. Because the Democrats' thinking is that by diplomatic measures you can buy a friend, which is, as you know, a pure fantasy. Demographics is one huge problem for China, but it's a long-term problem. Their main problem right now is that they are primarily built on exports, and so they basically control so many countries across the world by flooding or by quartering supply chains and ports. And using that leverage of exports, they've been able to grow and really take from the West so much and use it to build their military. What Trump has done is he has looked at that and said, tariffs are my best way of moving supply chains out of China without using any conventional military forces. I will use the economy, which is my strength, the American way of life, against China's weakness, which is that they are totally based on exports. Their personal consumption, their own economy is very weak because the average Chinese makes about $10,000 to $15,000 a year. So they cannot grow as an economy based solely on exports, and they're having a very hard time convincing the Chinese to become consumers. And that has really started to break the lead that China had going into this presidency. They were really in the lead against the United States. That's a harder point to explain to Americans. Americans do not see danger or threat because they for 30 years they've not seen anything that could make a dent in the American empire. And it's very hard for Americans to realize that had Kamala won in 4 years, like at the end of her presidency, the United States would have been in a situation where it would have had to face very tough choices. And so luckily we don't have to discuss that. But the export economy that the Chinese are built on is crumbling. India is able to take a lot of that manufacturing power away from China, and that's only going to accelerate. And then you have a lot of companies that are coming back to US soil because they want to and not pay tariffs when they import into the United States. And so between that combination of moving supply chains out of China into more friendly countries and onshoring of the most advanced industries back to the United States, that's step 1 of shaking the Chinese economy. Now, the idea is not to create a collapse in China, but to help it understand that America is America, and what they've been dealing with, which is weak leadership, stupid leadership, visionless leadership, all the way from the Clinton to the Bush era, then obviously to the Obama era and the Biden era. That's over. And so now they have a choice. Can they coexist with the United States? Can they lose this fantasy that they're going to take down the United States, which is the stated goal of the CCP? Can you coexist with us? That literally is Trump's vision. His ultimate vision is for those two economies to be very balanced, to thrive and to denuclearize. That is the crown jewel of his presidency. He would like to denuclearize China, the United States, and Russia. Though we're very far away from reaching that goal, in order to get there, China must understand that they now are dealing with the most capable leadership in American history. And secondly, that this leadership is not looking to destroy the CCP, but it is looking to show it a new path in which those two countries can coexist. How do you coexist with the CCP? The United States, what it's trying to do is create an alliance, just like there's an alliance of the BRICS, an alliance of the countries that believe in the same ideas and merits of the United States. Now, I'm not talking about NATO. This is not that. It is an alliance of countries that believe in capitalism, believe in free enterprise, believe in personal rights, and they are scattered around the world because you cannot call many of the European countries that way at all right now. And what you're trying to create is a system that is reliable, where those countries trade with each other. And then there are connector economies, or in other words, countries that are able to work both with the Chinese axis and the American axis. And those would be the connector economies that will have a dual place in the world. But we are moving into that type of a globalization. Globalization is not over. Not over at all. It is just changing from a trustless system where every country sources from another country that offers the goods or services or materials for the cheapest price. That has gone away. That is the hyper-globalization world, and that has gone away because Trump doesn't want that. He wants copper to be made in the United States. He wants pharmaceuticals in the United States. He wants chips in the United States. So what he's saying is, I trust, but not all the way. So I need stuff made here, and some stuff I'll buy from other countries, but only countries that I know I can deal with. The era of agreements and contracts on paper is over. I need to know that I can trust you on a much deeper level than just a piece of contract. And that's the globalization we're moving into. That may be one of the reasons why he's extending negotiations with Mexico, because they're one of the largest silver producers. And another reason why I don't think there's going to be a tariff on silver. They're also a connector economy. They can work both with China and the United States. That's one thing. And secondly, that's very important about Mexico, is that it borders the United States. And so it has tremendous potential in the next 10 years to develop itself and also provide the very needed workforce to America, but not in the way that you think. If you look at the Mexican map, from the middle to the south of the country, it's very undeveloped. And so the one of the ideas that is now getting advanced is a magnetic levitation, or a very speed system of rails that connects Mexico all the way down to South America to the United States. And in that sort of a scenario, you could have Mexican workers that punch their card at 6 o'clock in the morning, wherever they are in Mexico, and with a bullet train, they get onto US soil by 9 o'clock in the morning, 3 hours. And when they cross the border, it gets tagged and exactly where that worker is. And he doesn't have to get off or anything. He slams right through, gets to the heartland of America, works his shift, and at 5 o'clock in the afternoon he can go back. 8 o'clock at night he can eat dinner in Mexico, hundreds of miles away. And that way you solve most of the worker problems in the United States without importing the workers, but by uplifting the Mexican economy. And if you connect those rails, and you can now do that on a grand scale, you can connect the entire Americas. So that's a plan that's being worked on. And just, when you think about the potential, there are hundreds of millions of people that would do that. There are some people that would even sleep Sunday till Friday or Monday till Thursday in the United States and then go back for the weekends. The transportation boom is what's going to fuel this. And just when you have an administration that is pro-business and that is able and capable, that is the type of projects that you can expect to see in the years ahead. Well, pretty exciting, and it's going to be very interesting to see how gold and silver play a role in all that. I just want to say about gold and silver, in the last 2 weeks, the entire framework for stable coins has changed with the Genius Act the Clarity Act and the Anti-CBDC Act. And to those who don't understand what this means, this ensures that the dollar remains the reserve currency of the world, because the two biggest demographic groups that are growing are Africa and Latin America. These are young demographics and they are unbanked. You can't expect them to have traditional banks. This is not the type of structure that they are getting into. But 60% of them have an iPhone or a smartphone. And for them, if you offer them to have their savings in a stable coin pegged to the US dollar, they will do anything for that type of access, that type of stability, to get away from their own fiat currencies and move into the dollar world, basically. And that is what stable coins offer. So that is a masterstroke from the Trump administration, because that's a weakness for China. They don't believe in crypto or in blockchain or in anyone else manipulating their currency, right? The yuan. So that is classic Trump understanding the way things are. Now, something very important that he said in a gaggle, one reporter asked him about the dollar. And he said, and this is very important to understand, because this is what Trump wants. He said, you know, a strong dollar makes you feel good as a country. It makes you feel like you have a stable country. But the real thing you want is a weak currency. That's what all of these other countries want. They want a weaker currency because that's more competitive. So he said this was in response to a reporter asking him about the weak dollar. The dollar is having one of the most dismal years since 1971. And basically Trump said, look, it's great to have a strong currency, but I'm not going to disturb these tendencies right now that are happening and these trends with the dollar. So you have a weak dollar president, and that's very important to understand about Trump. Even though he may play the role of, I want a strong dollar, the dollar needs to be reserve currency of the world, etc., etc. That's true. It needs to be the reserve currency, but he does believe it's artificially high, and he wants it lower. And so that's why I'm saying that gold and silver will have a correction, but in the longer terms of his presidency, so 2026, 27 and beyond, I do expect both precious metals to continue to go much higher, and I agree with that. He's alluded to that in his first term. I remember specifically when he said, you know, we want the dollar to be a little weaker, so I don't think this is anything new for him, and I tend to agree with that. And we think about this, the Genius Act. You know, I'm not as in the know on what the particulars are of the legislation. Some of it does make me a little bit nervous because I think in one aspect of it, they want to replace the FedNow system with these stable coins, but all of it makes me fearful a little bit about tracking of where the dollars come and where they go. But nonetheless, that's just one concern. Can I say something about that? Two things about that. One, J.D. Vance, who's a real proponent of freedom, has basically assured, and you can watch his address at the Bitcoin conference, he's basically advocated to the Bitcoin community not to trust the government and to say, hey, you don't know who's going to be the next guy here in this Oval Office. So we will never hurt your privacy and we will do anything to protect it. During our term, we would codify and put rules and regulations and laws in place, but continue to fight for your own privacy and freedom, etc. So this administration 100% is not going to mess with your privacy. And so that's one part of this equation. Now the second part is even sexier because I want you to really understand how Trump views the Fed. Trump sees the Fed as an organization that should not exist in his world. He's looking at debt as a businessman. What he's saying, and what Scott Bessent, who's the best Secretary of Treasury ever, is telling him is, look, Janet Yellen has basically created this huge balloon payment that the government owes because she was running the worst treasury ever. And she basically got to a situation where she financed everything with short-term debt. And now you have $12 trillion, which is a third of the national debt that needs to be refinanced this year. And that's why Trump is saying, between me and refinancing this debt at much lower levels stands this banker, this unelected bureaucrat that is standing between me and or the majority of the voters in the United States that want to refinance the debt at a lower level. That's why they elected Donald Trump, and achieving that. And then when you look at his thinking about America, he has posted on Truth Social a book recommendation about American Leviathan. That's a book that I think everybody should read. One of the things in the book explains the birth of statism in America, how America went from a constitutional republic to what it is today. The first seeds came with Theodore Roosevelt and Woodrow Wilson. Those are the first reformist presidents. In fact, Woodrow Wilson was an anti-constitutionalist. He hated the Constitution. Exactly, and he is the one that birthed the Federal Reserve Act. And so to Donald Trump, he wants to go back to the era that ended right before Theodore Roosevelt became president in 1901. That's the America that President Trump wants. And so if that is the America that he wants, and that is an America that did not have a Federal Reserve, you can see how he thinks about the Federal Reserve as an organization. I think that's important because you may see, very according to his popularity levels, you may see him getting very aggressive with the Fed, perhaps merging it with the Treasury Department, perhaps making the Secretary of Treasury the head of the Fed, or putting the Secretary of Treasury at the board of the Fed. There may be a lot of things that he can do. Stay tuned for that. That might be the biggest ones of his presidency. That would be massive. You know, he has referenced William McKinley for his views on tariffs before, and talked about the External Revenue Service. That was exactly right. Well, brilliant. Well, Lior, thank you so much. This has been very helpful, very informative, and I appreciate you taking the time to share with us. Absolutely amazing. With that being said, I want to extend a multitude of gratitude to you, Lior, and to every one of you watching this as well, and encourage you to please rate, share, comment, and subscribe.